Good afternoon, everyone. Great to have you here. Thank you so much for attending. My name is Julie Corrigan. I'm an associate professor at Concordia University, and I'm joined by my marvelous doctoral students who will introduce themselves as they stand up for their part of the presentation. And we're just gonna move along here. So we are at the beginning of this research trying to understand the needs of neurodiverse students in the Quebec system, and in particular in the English education system, as we're here today at the QUESCREN conference. And a little bit about why is this study needed. Wow, there's like light right in my eye here. I'm trying to go on a little bit of an angle. There we go, much better. Okay. So why is there a need for this study? As you may or may not know, roughly 1 in 5 students are neurodiverse, according to the Conference Board of Canada. We don't have particular numbers for Quebec's K-11 system, but these are based on global estimates, which put the figure of neurodiversity among the population somewhere between 15 and 20%. So that means actually there's a pretty good chance that in this room right now, there are some neurodiverse folks. So we can expect, of course, that this is very common in our classrooms. And what do we mean by neurodiversity? You have perhaps heard that term before. The term actually was borrowed from the term biodiversity to talk about the richness in genetic species and the richness within biological differentiation among species. And the idea was that diversity is strength. And so within each of our brains makes us unique and different. And so that is the idea behind neurodiversity. And when we speak of neurodiversities, we're speaking of particular, what can at times be recognized as a disability. So for example, I'm a mom to a daughter who is neurodiverse. My daughter has autism, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and speech sound disorder. I feel like I'm missing something, but anyhow, so she's a neurodiverse student. Yet if she were to walk in the room, well, aside from the fact that she's a child, so she'd stand out of this room, you would probably not be able to tell the difference among her and from other students. Another thing we know is that these minoritizations compound when there's intersectionality among these. So when we have a neurodiverse student, such as my daughter, who is an Anglophone, we moved from Ontario. So in addition to facing barriers as an English language learner in a French immersion program, who also has dyslexia, et cetera, the difficulties and barriers are often compounded. And of course, when one is born neurodiverse, that doesn't dyslexia, you don't someday, overcome dyslexia. You can develop a number of strategies to help make reading easier, for example, but once a dyslexic always is dyslexic, as will be the case for my daughter. And these barriers continue, of course, into higher education and into the workplace. So, and often it's interesting because students will come to me as a university professor and who, a 30-year-old woman will come to me and say, oh, I just found out last week that I have autism or that I have ADHD, and so these barriers persist into higher education. So a bit about the study that we're in the process of conducting right now. We're kind of at the beginning stages. As I mentioned, we did what is called a needs analysis. So what is a needs analysis? A needs analysis essentially asks the question, where are we now? So what is the situation? What is the context for Quebec's K-11 neurodiverse students? Where are we at now? Where do we want to be? Because we probably have some educators in the room, people working within education. We know that the situation is currently not optimal. Okay, so we can look to other jurisdictions, other countries, and within ourselves to see that there continue to be barriers. So where are we going? And what we did was we analyzed data sources, and those data sources came from Quebec Ministry of Education curriculum documents, policy documents from the Ministère de l'Éducation, from scholarly articles, and also from grey literature and the media. So these are some of the sources that we consulted. In terms of analyzing the data, so we conducted a literature review, and there are numerous ways one could go about analyzing the data. But in particular, we did what's known as a SWOT analysis. And that's just a way of saying we wanted to know what's working, what's not working, where do we have strengths, where do we have limitations, and what are some opportunities that we see as well. So each of the S standing for strengths, W for weakness, O for opportunities, and T for threats. So, as we're looking at a particular curriculum document or at the QEP, we might say to ourselves, what's working really well in this document? But what are some things that aren't working so well, and where might that be improved upon? So that was the means through which we conducted this study. And I'm gonna call on, oh wait, no, it's Laura then, next, yes. Okay, so we're gonna switch to Laura's presentation. So there's two components of this presentation. Laura, who's going to speak about her experience working in the TSA, or a classroom for students with autism. And then Gabriella, who's going to speak about a portrait of dyslexic learners in the Quebec context. And then I'm going to wrap things up. So we just need to switch. Perfect. Here we go.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giacco. I'm a second-year doctoral student here at the Concordia. I've been teaching for a little bit over 10 years, 5 of which have been dedicated to teaching English as a second language in the French public high school. The other 5 were miscellaneous jobs, different contracts as the life of a first-year teacher. I've taught pretty much all levels, including specialized classrooms. More recently, graduate students who are looking to pursue second language education in terms of as educators. So these experiences have given me a lot of understanding, but also a lot of appreciation for how students learn, particularly those with different learning abilities. And over the years, the range of diverse teaching concepts has exposed me to the reality of teaching both neurotypical and neurodiverse learners. So it was ultimately my teaching students were placed in a classroom that led me to pursue my doctoral studies. I found myself struggling with evaluations and implementation of competency-based curriculum design in the classrooms, which made me realize the need for more inclusive and evidence-based approach to assessing learners. But the goal of today's presentation is not to talk about my dissertation, but to focus and to share information about the QEP's curriculum for English as a second language program, so that we can start to maybe consider some of the more equitable ways in which we can teach neurodiverse students with autism spectrum disorder. Okay. So this is just kind of like an overview of the presentation. Just give you a quick rationale, explain to the documents that were used for this analysis. Just a quick mention of the methods, some background information. Let's go over some of the findings, and then a quick overview of the summary. So for today's presentation, I'm going to be talking about the challenges and opportunities involved in teaching English as a second language to students diagnosed with ASD. While this topic can expand to many points of discussion, I'm just going to focus on CSI classrooms, particularly within elementary schools, and exploring some of the strengths and limitations of the QEP's ESL program. So, anecdotally speaking, in my own classroom, there has been a rise in the number of students exhibiting neurological differences, and I think it's safe to say that this is an occurrence that's happening in different classrooms here in Quebec. So, because inclusion and diversity have become central pillars in education, the question of why this matters is that it's essential to consider how and whether existing programs such as the QEP ESL curriculum can meet the diverse cognitive, social, and communicative needs of neurodiverse learners. So understanding how programs support or fall short of addressing the needs of students with ASD can offer insight into how the program might be adapted in terms of instructional and assessment methods to ensure equitable opportunities for all students. So to identify areas of growth or potential, like Julie mentioned, it was important, we thought it'd be a good way to do a SWOT analysis. I think I moved on step. Wrong one, sorry. So for this study, a review of educational documents on teaching English as a second language was organized and analyzing using a SWOT analysis framework. I think all my things are all messed up with this, with the PowerPoint, sorry. So we, with subcategories for strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats, the literature of the following documents were used. So these were the list of all documents used in the SWOT analysis. This method was beneficial because by organizing the literature into these 4 subcategories, there were recurring themes and patterns that were identified, and which I'm going to discuss a little bit later. So these documents provide valuable insight into the curriculum design, pedagogical strategies, and classroom practices. So before I dive into the findings, I think it's important to give you a brief context of the CSA classrooms and some of the learning profiles of students who are found there. Okay. So in public French schools, we have classes that are called troubles de spectrum de l'autisme, so TSA classrooms, and they're quite common in different kinds of service across different boards and across the province. So these specialized classrooms are designed to support students with autism by providing a structured environment and individualized instruction, thereby giving students access to specialized educators, behavioral technicians, and the profile of the students placed in TSA classrooms often have impairments in communication and social interaction. So in addition, many students experience sensory modulation difficulties of varying degrees and difficulties in planning and organization. So within TSA classrooms, a wide range of profiles exists, therefore a corresponding wide disparity in needs also exists. So such learning profiles, however, do not hinder opportunities for developing social, academic, or communication skills. On the contrary, the goal of the TSI classroom is to promote inclusion by allowing students to participate in mainstream curricula. But in examining a mainstream curriculum like the second language program, there are challenges for neurodiverse learners, and I'm going to discuss them after we talk about some of the strengths of the program. Okay, so in examining the ESL curriculum, one of the program's primary strengths is the wide range of methods, techniques, and principles of language learning that are incorporated into the language teaching. The program makes mention of social constructivist theory of learning, communicative approach, strategy-based learning, cooperative learning, and touches a little bit about the cognitive approaches to language learning. So even within the program, there's a hint of Vygotskian theory to second language learning, emphasizing how second language learning can develop through continuous collaboration and interaction with other learners. There are studies from Jim Latoff, Richard Donato, that view interaction as a central factor in second language acquisition. So this model of language learning is inherently apparent in the ESL program, and rightly so, because this model is more of an authentic and meaningful way approach to learning language. The way in which the CP models its program, based on these findings, is divided into communicative competencies. Okay, and then those are divided into 3 categories. And I know it sounds confusing, but I'm going to explain to you how the model works. So in elementary, there are 3 cycles. So cycle 1, in which students have to act on understanding of text and communicate orally in English. And these provide unique opportunities for students to come into contact with the English language and culture through the use of authentic songs, rhymes, and stories selected from a repertoire of early childhood education resources. In cycle 2 and 3, students are introduced to 2 new competencies: to reinvest understanding of oral and written text, and then to write text, while maintaining the first competency to interact orally in English. So if you notice, to interact orally in English is the backdrop of both other competencies, okay? So according to the QEP, the 3 ESL competencies are developed in synergy and in an interactive learning environment. So when students are developing one competency, they constantly draw upon the other 2. So the competencies to interact oral in English, like I mentioned, is at the forefront, because students are expected to always communicate via the English language. So when developing an understanding of text, students explore various types of text. They construct the meaning message of these texts with their peers and their teachers, and reuse or adapt the knowledge they have acquired. This reinvestment is often carried out through the other two ESL competencies. And then finally, in the writes and produces text, students write with a purpose to express themselves for an intended audience. So they plan, they draft, and they refine their writing with attention to coherence, accuracy, and creativity in their writing. So this process helps to strengthen their oral and reading competencies because they've drawn on what they have learned from listening, reading, and interacting with others. Together, the three competencies form an integrated framework that promotes language development through communication, comprehension, and expansion in meaningful context. Personally, I believe that this framework, where students are encouraged to work together to solve linguistic problems, is impactful and meaningful. There are several activities that I myself use in the classroom, which ask students to discuss vocabulary, grammar, or negotiate meanings to build an understanding of their own language skills. And this type of collaborative dialogue serves as a bridge between communication and language learning. And this program model is great for neurotypical students, but neurodiverse students with autism tend to have a different experience with this framework, and therein lies its weakness. So these are the weaknesses of the program: social interaction, comprehension, and fine motor skills. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm only going to be focusing on these two and highlighting them more so, for the reason that a student can't achieve the third competency if they can't even achieve the first two. So it's like a big barrier in which students with autism are faced with, so we can't even expect them to get the third tier of the competency. So while the program is effective for neurotypical learners, its primary weakness is that it largely caters to one single population, overlooking the needs of neurodiverse students. Unfortunately, the program does not adequately address the pedagogical or developmental learning needs of diverse language learners, which differ significantly from those found in a mainstream classroom. So, as a point of comparison, many students, as I mentioned, with ASD have difficulty understanding aspects of social interaction and communication. So understanding how to interact and communicate with peers is challenging for them. So I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the things here. In terms of social interaction and communication, the following are some of the developmental and neurological conditions that characterize individuals with ASD. So there is persistent deficits in social communication. So this includes challenges with reciprocity and maintaining eye contact, as well as difficulties with verbal communication. In terms of social interaction, individuals with ASD have difficulty maintaining relationships, as well as adopting behaviors best suited to fit the social context. And some individuals with ASD also have repetitive and restrictive patterns of behavior that can affect their ability to participate in activities in educational settings. So what I presented here, it's not a list of all the neurological conditions, but these are the most common characteristics that teachers see in a classroom, in a CEDEC classroom. There's also aspects of comprehension that I will discuss a little bit later. But I just wanted to show you the model in terms of, this is a standardized rubric in which we use to assess all students, including students in a CSI classroom with. And if you notice the different, I guess, different things that we look at, it's participation, oral interaction. So a student has to interact actively through a discussion, they have to use functional language, and then they have to use certain strategies. And if you compare it to their profile, there's obviously a barrier in which the student will not be able to achieve this competency, or at least have difficulty in doing so. Okay. And the second thing I want to consider is pragmatics. Okay, so pragmatics is the study of how language is used in context to express such things as directness, politeness, and deference. So even if a student with ASD acquires 5,000 words of the targeted language, they can still encounter difficulty in using the language because of their difficulty with interpretation. So competency 2 in cycles 2 and 3, which deal with the idea of reinvestment of a text, proves challenging for some students with ASD because it does not consider the difficulties these students face when recognizing the meaning of sentences or expressions used in specific contexts. So I'm just going to put this here side by side. This is a rubric for C2 for understanding of text, and then this is an image which I'll explain in a second. So since constructing meaning of text serves as the foundation of C2, another weakness of the program lies in their conventional approach to reading and comprehension tasks. So many students on the with ASD exhibit weak central coherence, focusing on details rather than the gist of the story. They may lack theory of mind, which affects their ability to imagine another person's thoughts and feelings, making it difficult for them to understand their actions and predict the next move. So in this image over here, this is what somebody who is neurotypical might understand from a text versus what a student who is neurodiverse, right? They miss parts of context that might differ from somebody who's neurotypical. And this will have a considerable influence on their ability to process and understand the text of a story, a novel, particularly one of fiction, in which we use when studying a second language, so that a student can kind of become familiar with the language through authentic text, right? So we want to expose them to English language, so we're going to expose them to novels. And this might be a challenging thing for students. So many ESL learners may understand vocabulary and have basic reading accuracy, but they will struggle to comprehend at a higher level because making inference requires combining textual clues and prior knowledge of culture, the world, which might be a barrier to them. So the curriculum tends to assume that neurotypical language processing and does not provide explicit strategies or offer differentiating support for students with ASD who may struggle with interpreting context, figurative language, or inferential moves. So mentioning, or just coming back to this one, which is a standardized rubric that's used by all ESL teachers in all classrooms, including the SI classrooms. They don't account for the pragmatic language challenges that many neurodiverse learners are going to face. I'm gonna jump into. All right, so I don't wish to view these challenges solely as weaknesses because they also highlight important opportunities for growth and adaptation within curriculum design and educational practices. Another strength that I did not focus on earlier, because it proves to be more of an opportunity, is the flexibility and creativity that the QEP's cross-curricular competencies and broad areas of learning, which are encompassed in the ESL program, will allow for. So because language learning is not restricted to one approach, meaning that educators can choose how to adopt their lesson to best fit the needs and abilities of their students, the implementation of differentiating instruction, activities, or task-based learning assignments modeled after a learner's ability is perhaps the starting point for educators to better understand the diverse ways students with ASD engage with English language learning. So because the ESL program has roots in the QEP's framework of cross-curricular competencies and broad areas of learning, which emphasizes that a successful education should enable students to use the learning they have acquired to understand the world around them and guide their actions, teachers have significant flexibility to design lessons that respond to the unique learning needs and life skills of students with ASD. So by leveraging this flexibility, teachers can incorporate visual aids, technology, assistive tools, or multisensory activities to support the different proficiency levels and cognitive profiles, of learners with ASD. So activities can be adapted to meet the needs of cross-curricular competencies. And if the ESL program were to align itself with a policy of special education, adhering to the promise of helping students succeed in terms of knowledge, social development, and qualification, by accepting that education success has different meanings depending on the needs and abilities of different students, and by adopting methods that favor their success and provide recognition for it, adaptability within pedagogical practices will allow for educators to experiment with differentiated instructional approaches to better create learning outcomes for learners with ASD. So following the thread, if the objective of the ESL program is to enable learners to communicate with people who speak English in Canada and throughout the world, then the threat posed by the current treaty model for second language learning is that its design does not support neurodiverse learners in acquiring this life skill. Yes, the QEP model arguably has a goal-oriented framework for language learning, which is clearly outlined in the progression of learning framework. Some of the ESL curriculum components are outdated. Published nearly 20 years ago, despite advancement in inclusive second language acquisition today, the QEP program continues to reinforce homogeneous methods of learning and teaching, which has an underlying assumption that all students acquire language in the same way. So the rigid rubric that measures students' authentic language use of English poses a risk for students with ASD because these assessments may fail to accurately reflect a student's real world language ability. So to conclude, while the results of this SWOT analysis revealed a strong foundation in second language acquisition models, examining the program's weakness and threats indicates a need for change. So a change that will support and not hinder the success of second language acquisition for neurodiverse students with ASD. To maximize language learning, the program needs to demonstrate inclusive methods, whether that be aligning itself more closely with the philosophy of CHSSN classroom models, the inclusion of more universal design practices, or the incorporation of multiple modes of engagement. The definition of diversity, which is absent in the ESL curriculum, needs to be incorporated.
Okay, so maybe perhaps while we're switching to Gabriella, if you have a question for Laura, as we're switching over presentations, that would be great.
I did have a question. So there was one picture where you had showed that there was a lack of context in terms of like the visual interpretation. But like it kind of felt, because it's a spectrum, I don't imagine everyone interprets that the same way.
Exactly. It's hard to, the challenge in the program is that it's very difficult to pinpoint one method in terms of like developing comprehension or assessing comprehension, because every learner learns differently. But I think recognizing that we cannot use the measure, like the assessment that they currently have, is the first step to maybe figuring out afterwards. Because this one is used across no matter what class, like doesn't matter, mainstream, langage classes, it's still the same, which it can't be done. Like it's a big problem to use that. But I understand what you're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, what I was saying was that it felt kind of weird to use one image to interpret how people are seeing the image when it's a spectrum. Like, I don't know, I don't feel like it was clarified enough that this is possibly one way that a neurodiverse person could interpret versus
the photo, what it's suggesting is that there is context, and whatever context that is missing, that's the difference. Like everyone, like you mentioned, will understand context differently, but for a student who is neurodiverse with ASD, there are missing elements. Now, what those missing elements are, what they don't grasp, is something different. So the whole point of the image is the metaphor to understand, and we just don't see things the same way. It's not limited to just all students with ASD view it this way, but just the idea that this is absent, like, and what is absent, that's something else.
Okay,
Does that clarify the image context a little bit?
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're gonna continue with questions, of course, as we go through, but I think we'll move on to Gabriella, and then we're gonna come together as a room as well to discuss. And I also want to, as you're thinking through this, we are at the beginning stages of this study, so we want feedback from you as well, what your experiences are in the K-11 classroom with respect to neurodiverse learners.
Perfect. Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gabriella, and today I will be presenting you a SWOT analysis on dyslexic students in Quebec. So it's the portrait of a dyslexic learner in Quebec. So just to begin, we're going to start with a definition of what dyslexia is by the DSM-5. So I'd say that it's a neurodevelopmental disorder of biological origin manifested in learning difficulties and problems in acquiring academic skills. So reading, writing, and mathematics as well. Markedly below age level and manifested in the early school years, lasting for at least 6 months, not attributed to intellect disabilities. This is very important to highlight. Developmental disorders or neurological or motor disorders. There are 4 diagnostic criteria, so impaired domains and sub-skills should be listed. Some things that I would like to point out is the intellectual disabilities. A lot of people, when they come forward that they have dyslexia, or even parents that have, the diagnosis that their child has it, they think oftentimes that it has something to do with an intellectual capability, but it does not. It's very much just it's a neurodiverse student. Another thing to bring your attention to is that it's reading, writing, and mathematics. Oftentimes people think that it's, inverting letters. It's much, much more than that. So it's a multifaceted learning disorder. So a little bit to get to know me. So this is me as a child. So when I started school, pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, I had a very, very, very difficult time with writing even my own name. And I remember in kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, I couldn't write it. I would have to go and find my name on a cubby and then jot it down. I had a really hard time even with sight words. I remember students were able to, identify their friend James because they were able to read his name as of the 2nd month of the school year. I was not able. However, I had no issues with my verbal dialogue, which is another key indication for dyslexia. It has nothing to do with verbal cues, so I was able to speak French, English, and Italian. So when I was diagnosed at 8 years old with dyslexia and ADD, it was a bit of a shock to my parents because they said, well, at home, she's so expressive, she's able to talk, she's able to, sing songs. We're a bit confused as to why she has it. So my academic journey was difficult because of the obstacles and having to navigate a system that is primarily designed for one student. We have yet to meet this one student. It is designed for one person. Where he is, where she is, where they are, we don't know. But so it was very, very challenging. I had a lot of teachers who did not encourage me or who did not uplift me in an academic setting. And yet here I am doing my PhD. So it's, their strategy did not work on me. But yeah, so in 2022, I got a bachelor's degree from McGill University in kindergarten elementary school education. Then I went off to do my master's at UQAM in Employability. I went to French elementary school and high school. So from the ages of 8 to 16, I was followed twice a week by an orthopedagogue in the private sector and even at school. So I always had a very strong support team, being that I was in the French sector. And this is what led me to go into orthopedagogy because I reaped the benefits of it and I wanted to learn more about it and see what I could do for students who are experiencing the same difficulties as me. And then in 2025, I started my doctoral studies at Concordia University, and most likely I will be centering my studies on dyslexia and parent involvement and how to equip people at home to help their children, because I feel that's what's lacking in the province, even in Canada, and I'm sure in other parts of the world. So my research question for today was, how do the provincial education policies in Quebec limit and support access to effective interventions for kindergarten to grade 12 students with dyslexia? And then this, I just wanted to point out that dyslexia is recognized as a disability in Canada under the Canadian Human Rights Act. This is important because for the strengths, we will get to it, why it's important that it is recognized as a disability. Okay, so for today, the methods, I used official government documents from associations and orders, as well as anecdotes through media outlets. And I have a reference page at the end. Okay, so what does the government excel at for dyslexic students in Quebec? So we do have some strengths. First of all, a commitment to inclusion. So le gouvernement du Québec is obliged to have a system that organizes services for students with disabilities, handicaps, learning difficulties, and adaptation needs. It's important to know that it's a systematic objective rather than a local practice. We also have individualized education plans. These are IEPs. So if a student is diagnosed with a learning disability, they have to have proof documentation to then have an IEP given to them by the school. And an IEP allows parents, guardians, teachers to come together and to intervene and accommodate students who are in need by, ensuring standardized documents, ensuring that the exams are appropriate for the given child, and so forth. We also have teacher resources, tools, and training materials. So the government of Quebec does offer these tools for teachers to go out and know how to help kids that have certain difficulties. It is important to note, though, that this is a willingness, right? So it's not mandated, it's not obligated to actually follow these classes. It has to be the teacher who wants to themselves go out and, oh, I do have, a child in my class who has dyslexia. I want to know a bit more about them. Let me go consult this book. So again, it has to be a willingness from the educator themselves. We do have accessible assessment guidelines. So l'Ordre des psychologues du Québec, there is a certain criteria that needs to be met with to actually give a diagnosis to have dyslexia. So this is a uniform in Quebec. So you have to actually have these difficulties in order to have that title. Then we have financial support for students with recognized disabilities by the Gouvernement du Québec. So this one, it's important because I really put in bold recognized disabilities, because what is a recognized disability? It can be very difficult to actually get these financial tools and this financial assistance for students and for parents. For example, when I was diagnosed at 8 years old, my parents got a letter from the government saying, okay, Gabriella could have a laptop, to use in class, but you're going to have to check her as mentally challenged in order for her to have this technological tool. My parents did not feel comfortable checking that box, not because it's wrong to be mentally challenged, but because that wasn't what I was diagnosed with. It was dyslexia, and it has nothing to do with an intellectual capability. So my parents felt that if they were to check that box to just get a laptop, they're taking it away from someone who actually is mentally challenged and needs help in that domain. So that we're going to get into it now, the limitation, but that was just a little anecdote to get into the next slide. So some weaknesses. What are some limitations for dyslexic students in Quebec? Unfortunately, there is a very long wait time. If you go into the public system, it's 1 to 2 years in order to actually have access to a neuropsychologist to give a diagnosis with dyslexia. Another thing that's very interesting is that English schools in Quebec tend to have more students with special needs in their schools. It's about 90%, whereas in French schools, it's 76%. However, people will often look at those numbers and say, oh, okay, great, 90% of students with special needs are in English schools. That doesn't mean that they're actually getting the help that they require, because of all the government funding cutbacks that we had even this year when we're going into it. Millions and millions of dollars, and the first things to get cut are unfortunately services for kids with special needs. So although 90% are in English schools, they are not getting the required help that they deserve. Screening and early detection is a bit difficult. Screening is vital, but not yet entirely uniformly implemented in Quebec. So Quebec has no clear mandate to do a universal screening for dyslexic students. Right now in Quebec, we have a very hard time with false positives and false negatives. I'm an orthopedagogue, and so I often have students who apparently have a dyslexia and then come to realize it was a difficulté d'apprentissage. So that too is dire to the problem, because what happens is that we're intervening or when we're not supposed to, or we're overlooking students, we're mislabeling them. So it's not a good mix. Also, there is a bit of research saying that adding progress monitoring and dynamic assessments could help with false positives and false negatives, but again, we have to find a way to do it in the province. The cost is another weakness, because in Quebec, if you go the private route, it'll be $2,000 to $5,000 for you to get an evaluation from a neuropsychologist. It's not every family that could afford that, and it shouldn't be something personally that parents have to pay, because even if you come from a wealthy family or a family that, you know, is lower income, this is a human right to know what's wrong with your child and to be able to help them. So the cost is another weakness, and oftentimes students will come in, for instance, I have a student who speaks 5 languages at home. So the neuropsychologist thinks that it could be a dyslexia, but because 5 languages are spoken at home, they can't know. They're gonna have to come back when their daughter turns, I think, 12, and they're gonna have to pay again another $5,000. So even if you go once, it doesn't mean that it's a final assessment. It could mean that you have to go back and confirm that what was possible is actually in fact the diagnosis of the child. Another point is the language system inequities. We do live in Quebec, where French and English often times, you know, everything is political, so is education. We often butt heads, and there are issues with the French language system and the English language system. So English language system in Quebec faces unique challenges, such as the shortage of teachers, fewer services in certain regions, and the eligibility burden for English language instruction. Last point is the terminology, which I kind of touched base on. For instance, in Quebec, there's a very big, there's an issue with difficulté d'apprentissage and trouble d'apprentissage. So difficulté d'apprentissage will go away. It's the students, for instance, right now, their parents are going through a divorce, and it's affecting their study habits, and they're having a very, very hard time. That is a difficulté d'apprentissage. There's nothing wrong with them neurologically, whereas the trouble d'apprentissage, even if there is an intervention in the short run, we still have these manifestations of the difficulty. So it's not an all of a sudden type of history, it's that it's been persisting through years, right? It started off in kindergarten and it's persisting into high school, let's say. So terminology is also a weakness that we have in Quebec. Opportunities for growth. So what opportunities might there be for dyslexic students in Quebec? So I wrote to expand the role of an orthopedagogue into the English school system. I work as an orthopedagogue, as I mentioned, and there is no equivalent job title in the English sector. People will often say, oh, are you kind of like a resource teacher? I don't even feel comfortable saying that because it's not the same degree, it's not the same, we don't do the same thing. So I feel like I've read the benefits of having an orthopedagogue, and I do see how it's very, very effective. It would be interesting to have that type of a specialist come into the English sector. As an orthopedagogue, we do evaluate, we intervene, we support students with reading, writing, and mathematics, and often more complex learning difficulties and disorders such as autism, ADD, ADHD, TDS, or trouble du langage, and dyslexia. Early and preventative intervention via orthopedagogy. Les orthopedagogues, sometimes we even start as early as 5 years old, so go into the classrooms and already identify what students are probably going to be at risk. It's not in every school, but there are schools that do have these positions. The job of an orthopedagogue is that we like to intervene as soon as possible, because then we're able to better assess the child and help them. It's not to say that sometimes I've had children that have come to me at 16 years old and we do start, but there is still a lot of, I won't even say damage, but there is even a lot of psychological trauma, right? Navigating a system where you always felt that you were inferior, that you didn't understand yourself, that you were labeled. When you're starting off at 16, there's a lot of years that you're going to have to go through it. We always say that as an orthopedagogue, we're in October, we're also psychologists, we're also navigating students that have felt excluded from their environment. Professional development and capacity building. I thought it'd be very interesting to do like teacher orthopedagogy training programs with universities in Quebec, such as UQAM. I went to UQAM, and it is the founding father of orthopedagogy. So it'd be interesting for English universities to do partnering with them, doing classes, programs to better equipped teachers, and even the French system could learn from the English system, right? So a bit of a back and forth. This, just very quickly, this is the model that was made by Lynn Laplante. She is a university professor at UQAM. She's like the mother of orthopedagogy. She really pioneered it and made it what it is today. L'orthopedagogy is also not a very, very old job. It's maybe like 30, 40 years. It's not very, it hasn't been around for very, very long. This model now is actually getting a bit of attention in France and Belgium and Switzerland and other provinces in Quebec, where there is a French-speaking population. So very, very quickly, I'll give you an example. If I have a student that comes to me in first grade and they're having a very, very hard time with les lettres muettes, right? So chat en français, the T at the end, you don't pronounce it. If it's au féminin, you will say chat. But chat en français, we don't pronounce it. Some students will start saying chat, even if it's un chat. So I will have to go in l'identification des mots écrits, which is the processus spécifique, and work on le traitement morphographique. So that being said, that in French, there is a reason why we have des lettres muettes. Sometimes we're like, oh, the French language is so complicated. I don't understand why we have to have, these letters that don't make any sense. They're not for a reason, unfortunately. So we have to go to the processus spécifique, and then we could start navigating towards les processus non spécifiques. Non spécifiques for answers, des anaphores, so les mots de substitution. If I'm saying Julie mange une banane, elle a très faim, elle, who am I referring to? Julie. This is also very difficult for students with autism, les anaphores. So that's something that we work at as an orthopedagogue. So this system is like the holy grail when you're an orthopedagogue. You always go back to it every time you have a new student. You want to place them and see where you could go. So some threats. So what are some potential threats for dyslexic students in Quebec? So the professional competency is specifically competency 7, could be a bit ambiguous or left to interpretation because it's titled Take into account student diversity. This is very much, the paradigm of perspectivism, because I could have a very different interpretation of what diversity is. You can. Everyone here has a very different opinion of what diversity is. It's very unclear that competency when it comes to dyslexic students and how to help them, how to equip the classroom or what a teacher could do to help them. So professional competency 7 should be revised because it's still not very, very clear. English-French language system divide in Quebec. So eligibility for instruction in English specifies that a child may attend an English school if they have a serious learning disability. Again, what does a serious learning disability mean? That is again open to interpretation. You have to justify it. You have to, prove your point as to why this is a serious learning disability. The English school systems face resource gaps, as I mentioned, compared to French system schools. Resource limitation, we touched upon that, right? So the Gouvernement du Québec has said that there's a lack of support for teachers and students in Quebec in the English sector. Political or policy shifts, reducing support. The Bill 96 French language law changes how people perceive education in Quebec, right? So a lot of parents worry about their children who have a difficult time learning a language and they're going to have to do it in French. Some students do flourish more in English than in French and vice versa. So this is a threat to dyslexic students in Quebec. Food for thought. Julie and I were talking about other research questions that we would like to do research on. This one is a very long one and a very complex one. It would take years and years to really figure it out. So the question was, what is the relationship between school level resourcing policy indicators such as specialist staffing ratios, access to assessment services, formal intervention programs, and reading outcomes such as decoding, word reading, and fluency for students identified with dyslexia? And food for thought, we thought that it'd be interesting too to describe students' experience with dyslexia in Quebec and even parents, so how they navigate the system, being that oftentimes parents don't really know the educational system. It's not their job, they're not involved in it, so it's hard for them to navigate it, to know how to help their child. We also thought that it would be interesting to talk to people who have had, who are followed by des orthopédagogues, get their take on things, talk about the transition from elementary school to high school for students with dyslexia. So there's a lot to ponder when it comes to dyslexia and students in Quebec. Yeah.
Great. So all the references are available for those folks who want to move into that later. I'm going to present recommendations momentarily, but in the meantime, as we're beginning this research, I'd love to hear from the room. We have a lot of people involved in the educational system. If you've attended this session, potentially you have some interest in this. And we obviously did not cover everything today, all strengths, all weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And we specifically focused on ASD and dyslexia. We did not discuss all neuroatypical students. So we would love to hear from you right now. What are your thoughts about how Quebec is doing in the K-11 system with regards to supports and interventions for neurodiverse students? If anyone's comfortable, I would love to hear. Yeah, please.
So I'm currently I've been teaching in the Quebec system since 2012, but I also have a neurodivergent son. So, so your question was, how does the Quebec system, how has it done so far? I feel like I'm very fortunate because in the school, for my son, in his school, they're using accommodations without necessarily having the diagnosis right away. So, you know, have those accommodations, which is great and it's amazing. So he has access to a reader, you know, it kind of helps before we get to that official diagnosis, which is really great. But I knew there were already some, you know, difficulties with the education system as a whole. So that's kind of besides as a parent, but as a teacher, I find it. And I don't want to bring it very dark.
But
you know,
it can be.
But the reality is, I feel like the system is really setting up our students for failure. And it's very demotivating, not only as a teacher, educator, but also as a parent, because they just become kids like my son and other students that I have in my classroom. They just have this aversion to going to class and aversion to why, because we are quantifying students, like their intelligence, quantifying it in student achievement with those rubrics that you presented that are just so standard for neurotypical learners. And so that was actually one of my questions, was that knowing that a lot of these neurodivergent students that can be on the spectrum and they have certain strengths, you know, and they're all different, you know, if the system, like, because I can say, yes, there's great accommodations that are being done in the school for certain students that, you know, to demonstrate certain difficulties. But for example, in the classroom with my son's classroom with a teacher who's not necessarily, you know, I say this very, you know, politically correct, has much time to explore different differentiating instructions, you know, activities. How do I navigate it as a parent so that my son doesn't continue to reinforce that aversion to school because he's not flourishing in the way that I'd like him to? And at the same time, as an educator, there is so much information out there. And sometimes, you know, we try to do our best as teachers to try and kind of figure out how to navigate some of these things. But because there's such a spectrum of needs and what students, their potential, what they can do, I understand that there's a standard that we want to kind of, you know, have for our students so that, you know, we can say, here, you've achieved this, you know, let's move on to the next thing. I just, how to navigate the neurodiversity and in a system that's not necessarily structured for our neurodivergent population.
100%. That everything you said resonates with me because I'm a former high school teacher as well. And as I mentioned, my daughter is neurodiverse. And I'm sure if you've been a parent in this situation, there might be others in the room. You've had your kid come home from school in tears because with red all over, look at all the words you misspelled in French, which isn't even your first language. And you're like, you know, and most of my daughter's friends have left the French immersion program. And that's profoundly sad to me. That how are they going to flourish? We moved to Quebec. I moved here to become a professor. I came from the University of Ottawa. And I'm so proud of my daughter. She's now in 6th grade. She's somehow stayed in the French immersion program. I think there's hardly a single other kid with dyslexia that has stayed in French immersion. They've all gone to the English only program, which is, there's so much to unpack with what you said. It's going to come up in some of my recommendations, but we should have a tete-a-tete after this because I think there's a lot. Maybe we need some wine too, but that's another story. Okay, so a lot of, like, there is some beautiful things. Same thing with my daughter. She was provided accommodations before her official diagnosis. So that is a positive strength. Yeah, please.
Something that I noticed, I mean, I'm not a teacher, but I'm passionate about education. Something that I noticed like you mentioned, a strength of the QEP, yeah, was the cross-curricular competencies. But I wish this was something that was more emphasized because that's the whole point of school, is being able to like interact in such a capacity. And I feel like if we emphasize that instead of like such rigid things that literally don't matter,
That's it.
then we would have successful, thriving, neurodivergent and neurotypical people.
Yeah.
No,
I think that's an excellent point, because with the cross-curricular competencies, the conversations I've had with teachers, and it's the same with, I'm also a researcher in not just literacies, but specifically digital literacies. It's everyone's responsibility, so it's no one's responsibility.
yeah.
Because you don't actually need to comment on that on the report card directly, indirectly. I'm a teacher from Ontario, so pardon me if I misread the situation, but particularly with digital literacies, it gets mentioned in the new culture and citizenship and Quebec program, but how you translate that into the classroom can be very broad across teachers. So I take your point. Teachers will use them, but very differently, and whose responsibility are they? I mean, really, yeah. Was there a question, Leah? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna just say, like, you talked about the flexibility that the teacher has to incorporate how they want to teach certain things as an opportunity. I also feel like she was saying it's a lot on the teacher to try and figure out, and I wish we had room to play with the ponderation of those three competencies, right? I don't know if in the French system ESL they're all of equal ponderation, because they are in English as a second language, as a first language, right? So we've got the reading, writing, and talk are all 33%. And I wish we had flexibility for our neurodiverse students to say, well, they can thrive perhaps in one of these three. Let's make that worth a little bit more for them.
So interestingly enough, in the ESL program, the C1, which is the oral, is weighted at the higher.
How much is it? I'm curious.
That one is 40%, no,
Okay.
60%, and then the other ones are just very small, like
So-
weighted. So it really focuses on that, because it's at the forefront of the program. Everything revolves
Right.
around it. So if a student who's neurodiverse is having difficulties with those two other competencies will be left
Right.
behind.
I just do wish we had the agency to say, well, maybe I'll make it worth more or less for a student, and I think that would solve.
Adjust it.
Some, yeah.
Well, and to shine a spotlight on Laura's research too, she does research on nonverbal autistic students.
Right.
How are, I mean, it's just like, how try to factor that into the rubric. I mean, yeah, I'm gonna take two more comments, please, and we're gonna continue. I just wanna, yes, please, go ahead.
Just quickly, is there any difference between dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia? Is it all encompassing?
They're all different, and even when I was doing my master's at UQAM for dyscalculia, there's some professors and researchers that don't believe that it's an actual thing.
Oh, I see.
Wow.
Yeah, like some people think that it's dyslexia, but you have a hard time in mathematics. Some people think that you are dyscalculia, but you cannot have dyslexia. So this is also like yeah.
Just quickly, are there any recommendations, given the fact that there are more neurodivergent students also that will be applying to CEGEP? So are there any recommendations that you plan to put forward for the CEGEPs for the students that are expected to apply?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I had one professor at UQAM who worked only with CEGEP students, and she was creating a program for them, because it doesn't mean that when you go to CEGEP, your dyslexia stops, your disability stops. I went to Dawson, and Dawson had a center for students with disabilities, and I was very well accommodated there. I had extra time, a computer, I could go there to study. I had a good relationship with my mentor at the time. I don't think it's all CEGEPs that do that.
In relation to the new bill coming in?
Yeah.
Do we have anything there that's in the works?
I would have to look further on that, because I don't think it would, yeah.
And a last comment, is that 4 and 5, 9 or 10 in French schools with students with an IP plan, and with an orthopedic, oftentimes, and please confirm, they receive less and less services from the orthopedic.
Yeah, as you progress.
There's no more time. Is
Yeah.
that your experience as well?
Because I was followed in the private, I didn't have that experience, because my parents like really always, my brother and I's education always came above like everything else. So I'm very fortunate that I had parents who allowed me to have that service, but I do know that some students, after a certain time, it is cut off, that service. And even like, even des aides technologiques, sometimes they'll give students antidote in French, but then in English, you don't have access to it. And then I'm writing emails because I'm telling them that dyslexia is in French and English and Spanish and Italian and Mandarin. It's a language disorder. So it doesn't make sense that you could only have it in French and then not in English.
Yeah.
So even that is, there's a lot of,
Yeah.
mhm.
There's
questions.
so much, yeah, please go ahead. This is a great
Yeah, that's
discussion.
just a follow-up question.
Yeah.
They had also said interest in the CEDEC students with
Mhm.
all 14 Anglophone students are now required to finish their studies of for the école uniforme français
Mhm.
in lesser time than Francophone colleges.
Yeah.
So is there anywhere in your research or in your collaboration and research that you're looking also at the concentration and time constraints of studying with neurodiversity on the outcomes and student success?
That could be a very interesting thing, yeah.
We're at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
Write that one down too.
Yeah.
There's so many.
Because we focus more, we're focusing more on
More
like
in critical
elementary
learning.
and beginning high school, but that is true that they often get overlooked, like CHF University students, because we see them as adults. Oftentimes they get a bit swept under the rug, and we think that after certain points, these disabilities or these difficulties, go away, but you're correct that they stay, and we need to be able to
Yeah,
help
you have
them.
an added complexity with
Yeah.
14. There is an inequality that's already happening, even if you're not
Not.
neurodivergent
Mhm.
between Francophone colleges
Yeah.
and Anglophone
Yeah.
colleges, and you have that added factor with neurodiversity for students in the Anglophone colleges.
Mhm.
I'm just for looking at time, and I want to come back because there's so much important conversation happening here. Just to revisit with what Gabriella said earlier, we had this conversation,
Yes.
what was this, a couple of weeks ago? And I said, and I put this up, these are the 13 competencies. So if you are certified and you have a brevet in Quebec, that means you're certified to teach in Quebec, or if you're an in-service teacher looking for permanence, these are the competencies which one should master as a teacher. And they're logical, they make sense. And I looked at it, and this is what Gabriella mentioned. It's just ambiguous around, given that, and I'm gonna cite some research in a couple of slides, given that one of the things that especially beginning teachers struggle with the most is helping students with disabilities and assessing students learning who have disabilities. Wouldn't you think that given 1 in 5 students is neurodiverse, wouldn't you think that that would specifically be a competence? I'm just saying, like, I also teach digital literacy, so I'm like, okay, great, mobilize digital technologies. Is that really more important than the fact that 1 in 5 students is neurodiverse in our classroom? I was like, ooh, that seems really short-sighted to me. McCrimmon in 2014 also commented on this, looked at pre-service teacher education across Canada. This is not a problem specific to Quebec, surprise, surprise. Noted that childhood disabilities, it gets mentioned. I did my B.Ed at the University of Ottawa. We covered it, and I learned, I'm like, oh, what's autism? Who knew that one day I would have a daughter with autism? But at the time I was like, okay, I sort of have this idea of what autism is. Really, I still don't really understand it, but it's fascinating to me that this was so little attention to this, and to, I look back on how I taught high school in Ontario and so many gaps in what I did, and I wish I could turn back time and do better. But here we are. So to me, this should be a competency that teachers ought to know more about to become a teacher. And this perhaps then is not surprising. This is a research study that I did, that I participated in on behalf of Learn Quebec. We asked teachers, consultants, and administrators, what are the professional learning and development topics about which you would most like to learn? No big surprise if you had these, I saw Leah's presentation earlier, conversations in the classroom. Teachers struggle to know how to, and this was your question earlier, sorry, I don't know your name, but your question was, how as I a parent do I advocate for my child? But as a teacher, they're unprepared, given that it's barely covered in teachers college. They arrive in the classroom, guess what? They're not prepared to meet the needs of diverse learners. There are multiple things that we can do that are not rocket science to help these learners. There are multiple things. I was at Leah's presentation earlier this morning. You know, high-low, what's the term, high-low books?
Yeah.
Right, and there are numerous things, we can chunk learning, we can offer assistive technologies, there are so many things. Leah described earlier, and I've seen my daughter do this really well. If you're asking, you know, if you're trying to assess reading comprehension, is it necessary to assess their writing? Or could the student draw or graphically demonstrate their competency with understanding the story? As Leah's student, she showed this in a presentation earlier this morning, where her student was able to visually depict what happened in the story. So just there are so many opportunities, but teachers are, you know, are really struggling to do this. So if we look, you can't read this from the back, but the very longest bar here is differentiated learning, and also universal design for learning is right up here as well. So these, if we actually combine those two bars, you know, this is what teachers are asking for the most. So I spoke about pre-service teachers, same thing for in-service teachers, right? Because not only are pre-service teachers struggling, but teachers in the classroom are struggling. And they're underprepared for teaching in a classroom where often what we're seeing, and we identified this, and this was my experience in Ontario as well, you might have, you know, a good portion, a third to half of your students who have an IEP. So they're underprepared. So increasing in-service teacher formation as well. And then, you know, not surprisingly, we're having stories like this. I don't know, this was in the news not too long ago, but essentially this was a child with a learning disability who was unidentified, didn't receive the assessment needed in an appropriate amount of time, had to drop out of French immersion, is now today in a French school succeeding after eventually getting the appropriate supports and accommodations. So the consequences are very grave when we do this poorly. Continuing with recommendations coming from the province of Ontario, teachers are incentivized to pursue professional to postgraduate certificates. So in the province of Ontario, we have additional qualifications. If you want to move to the top level of the pay scale, the only way to do that is through postgraduate training. I don't see that as systematically in Quebec, where we're truly, I mean, money isn't everything, but if you're a teacher in Quebec who doesn't make the greatest amount of money, it can help, right? So this is just an example of an additional qualification course offered in the province of Ontario. If I wanted to move up the pay scale in Ontario to get from my A3 to my A4, I would need to take a number of these courses to achieve that top level of the pay scale. This one's specific to teaching students with communication needs, particularly students on the spectrum. So what a useful course, you know, this could be. I'm actually out of time, actually. I'm just looking at, no, we're good till 2:45, 2:45, okay. Finally, some of the last things that just looking at here, you know, creating more inclusive classrooms and bringing down barriers in classrooms and centering, actually, I do work in the area of educational assessment, looking at justice-based approaches. So instead of traditionally in assessment, what do? We try to identify deficits in learning. This is what you don't know. These are all the things you don't know.
Yeah.
We don't want to find out what you actually know. But if we change our assessment approaches to actually, we want to seek out justice for these rights holders. So we learned that, you know, that accommodations for students with disabilities is a human right. So if we center the student as a rights holder in the classroom, and we look to attain assessment outcomes that lead to a more socially just society, this can actually be very advantageous. So the idea here, we define and pursue justice-based consequences that seek to change existing and unequal power structures in society. And students who have disabilities face, and particularly when you're in Quebec as a minority status English speaker, we're increasing the barriers. So this was actually some work that I did with some colleagues across North America on developing justice-oriented approaches to evaluation. I don't have time to go into all that, but if you can't access this article, I'd be happy to email it to anyone. Looking at this process, which we published in Educational Psychologist, and we're all coming from the place as former classroom teachers as well. So we have 5 minutes left, and I would love to hear recommendations, comments, ideas. I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, please go ahead.
My biggest concern in everything that you discussed is that you were touching on English as a second language, but we spoke about French as a second language for our neurodiverse students. We talked about your daughter's friends or your daughter herself was left the French immersion program.
She's still in it, but
she's still in it.
Many of her friends left it, yeah.
Well, I'm a school board commissioner for one of the English school boards here in Montreal, and I see this thing with the MSB. My biggest concern is that I covered youth and adult vocational, but my youth sector over the past couple of years has seen a huge decrease in the enrollment in French immersion for these students, and we're talking about the increase of the students with the divergency within our classrooms, and that they're struggling more. And we also don't have our pedagogy in our schools who can help promote this language development. And we also have this this decrease of interest in education and in teaching and getting qualified French language speaking teachers to teach the French language within our system. And so this poses a risk, and it poses a major risk on the success of our child and their engagement with the students wanting to go to class and enjoying the class and looking at these alternative ways and looking at, the speeches being in the language development as that versus the reading and writing being really important. And my fear, having a young child who is a bilingual child, moving now into CEGEP, who's followed the train of the English language system, but is also a completely bilingual child, will still not have the competencies to possibly go into CEGEP in French. And that's her desire. And then she's going to have to do a bridging year to ensure that her competencies are at level to be able to continue to succeed. So I just want to make mention of that. So the research is so pertinent, and I wish it could go faster, but I know it can't because we are a victim to the system. And
that's it.
But
yeah, you've identified so many challenges. It's like we look at one barrier, there's another barrier and another barrier, but at the same time, we're hopeful because we're in a room full of people who are interested in this, who want to make a difference at all levels from kindergarten up through CEGEP and into university. And I have graduate students who are neurodiverse and flourishing, thank goodness. So it's I hear you, very, very much challenging. I've forgotten who I said was, please go ahead.
So Ashley Roy from Echo 02. So I come up from come down from Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. So we only have one English school, like one English elementary, one English high school. We don't have a CLC either. So a lot of the students are kind of left on their own. And what we're kind of noticing is that these students who are neurodiverse or who have other struggles are left to their own, left on their own because we lack resources. We don't have enough teachers. We don't have someone that is willing to move up from urban places like Montreal or Quebec City to work with these students that are seriously struggling. Like last year I attended the graduation, there was about 10 students that graduated. And of those 10, maybe about 8 went to continue on their education to CEGEP. So it's really hard to see. And myself being an English speaker, I originally come from Alberta. My kids are bilingual, but I chose to put them in a French speaking school because I knew that they would have more access to resources than they would if they went to English school. And that's really sad because my kids want to go to the English school so bad. I'm like, I'm sorry. I can't, as a parent, knowing that my youngest is we're waiting to get them diagnosed with ADHD, he's not going to be able to be put on the path of success if he were to go to the English school. And it's sad because I work with the English school. I work on the high school side. I'm a community partner, but I can't, in the right mind for my own child, say, I support this school as a decision.
Yeah.
So regional disparities add to the
Yes.
things here, so I complain living on the Rive Sud, the South Shore of Montreal, the lack of access to service for anglophones, but that would be
Yeah.
more compounded in a rural region. I think we have time for, no, we really don't, but if there's one more comment, I would welcome one more comment, and then we are unfortunately out of time, but please, there was a comment.
It's a question, I mean, it's a quick question.
Yeah, please.
Actually, I'm in QUESCREN. I'm wondering about this equity thing you brought up, about the $2,000 to $5,000 cost to get the diagnosis. I mean, we theoretically have a public health system. Do any other provinces cover this, or is this sort of a?
It
I don't know why.
is covered in Quebec.
It's not, is it?
It's covered, you'll wait.
It's
3
covered, you'll
years.
wait 1 to 2 years. If in the public system, it is covered by the psychologist of the school, but you have to wait 1 to 2 years. to
Or
have
3
a-
years, I'm just gonna say more like 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, we've asked, starting in grade 1, and haven't gotten it.
Yeah.
Right,
Gone through all the channels, we've been sort of.
Yes.
But I'm surprised to hear it's covered.
it's covered and so many parents, so I can see the look on your face, Millie says my daughter's aunt, but not by genetically, but she's a proper UCAT and so not. No, yeah, Abitibi, yeah, UCAT, University Quebec at Abitibi to Miscabigan. We're constantly lamenting about this, but it is covered, but many parents will go private because they are just sick of waiting and not knowing. As Gabriella mentioned, if you can't adequately and appropriately identify the disability, you're unsure of what path to take towards intervention.
Yeah.
So it's, people will say, I don't want to wait any longer. I need the diagnosis now, hence the, in neuropsych, it's, $3,000 to $5,000. I mean, yeah.
Question.
Yeah. Somebody's good, if no one's chasing us out, we are out of time. I'm not going to be offended if anyone needs to get up and leave. We are out of time, but
Do you foresee a time that every school starting from elementary will be obliged to have a specialist on staff?
no. I'm like at the time, we're pessimistic, but I'm wondering, like, to the extent that technologies have improved so much, like, you could be a Pulitzer Prize winning author, for example, and be dyslexic because of the assistive technologies that are available. I have to say that, like, as though this teacher, my daughter used to regularly fail spelling tests, as though spelling is the only thing that matters as part of being, it's like constant, the dictée in the French version, like, just stop with the verb conjugations in the dictée. Like, we have AI, we can get, we can spell properly and conjugate properly with the help from technology, but I'm more pessimistic.